The issue of climate change has both geospatial and temporal implications, transcending beyond national boundaries and across generations. Because of this, as we plan for the future of electricity, transportation, and industry, it is also important to look beyond geographic boundaries and consider generational differences as well. During this session, participants representing each current generation will share their visions for our energy future, the opportunities and challenges they see in addressing climate change, and thoughts on how we can ensure that the clean energy transition is just, both for the current generations and for those to come. This roundtable features several speakers, including the Minister Hamadoun Touré of Mali and the Climate Ambassador for Denmark, Thomas Anker Christensen. Unfortunately, due to an unexpected circumstance, Minister Dan Jorgensen is unable to join us today, but we are happy to have Ambassador Christensen here in his place. Minister Touré and Ambassador Christensen will be joined by Fatima Al-Foura Al-Shamsi of the Abu Dhabi Department of Energy, Cletus Burton of Kerlek, Olubunmi Olajide from the Energy Talk, Dr. Dana Clissonen of Evolutionary Guidance Media, and Gabriela Herculano of iClimate Earth. The roundtable session will be facilitated by EEI Vice President for International Programs, Dr. Lawrence Jones. Without further ado, please welcome everyone to the stage for our final session of the day, our Intergenerational Roundtable on Energy and Climate Change.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this final panel of the day, the Intergenerational Roundtable on Energy and Climate. It's nice to see all of you. And I must say that this was one of the most exciting panels to put together. One is intergenerational. Two is gender diverse. Three, it's time zone diverse. And then most interestingly, it has a lot of smart, brilliant people who's going to make my life very, very, very difficult. Ambassador Christensen should be joining us very soon. When you're doing these kinds of digital events, one of the things you should always remember, there's a friend of mine called Murphy, and he shows up when you don't want him to show up. And so I'm sure we all understand. So what we're going to do now to kick things off, obviously, most of you may have listened to the conversation I just had with Roman Scrinaris when we talk about being a good ancestor. And so we're going to begin by me first asking each of you to tell me what you're doing to be a good ancestor. So each of you take a minute or so just to tell me what you're doing, and then we'll come back and I'm going to ask then Minister Touré to give some additional commentary on some of the stuff he's looking at. And then after that, we'll get into a very rich and open dialogue. My role here is to facilitate the conversation. My role is not to necessarily keep you all from talking to one another. So I want us to be very diverse, a very robust conversation, because I've listened to all of you, I've met some of you, and I know you have very strong views. The idea here is intergenerational, climate and energy. How do you be a good ancestor? So let's begin. In no special order, I'm just going to look on the screen and say, I'm going to start with Gabrielle. Take a minute or so and tell us, what are you doing, Gabrielle, to make you a good ancestor?
Lawrence, thank you so much for having me today. I think that we're shifting the narrative where it comes to climate change investments. We want to shed the spotlight on the companies that are innovating, the companies where revenue is in line with decarbonization. And we want to showcase that impact can be quantified. For us, it is about potential avoided emissions in gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. So that's how we quantify impact. That allows us to estimate if we are on track with change, right? It's moving away from business as usual based on fossil fuel solutions like internal combustion engine cars, moving that away to low emission or zero emission like electric vehicles, right? So that delta is the potential avoided emissions, which is our key metric. So for us, we feel very compelled to to showcase that change can be made if we have a very specific plan. We need to focus on the companies that enable potential avoided emissions, and we need to quantify that. So it's having a clear roadmap and then making sure that we're meeting the milestones. And I think that that is what we owe to the future generations, is to do everything that we can in a very systematic and scientific way. So I think that that's what we're trying very hard to do.
Good. All right. So I like that, Gabrielle. So let's go over to Olu. Olu, tell us, what are you doing to be a good ancestor?
Well, I think for me it's more interesting because I'm just really early on in my career. I'm barely 2 years out of school at this point, and I think just from my career path, it's giving me a very good perspective. So I studied petroleum engineering, but I haven't spent any time at all being a petroleum engineer, and I think petroleum engineers and it's a career track that is going to go extinct in the next few years. So just keeping that mindset open, that people should be very willing to change. The energy sector is transitioning very quickly, and encouraging young people like myself to be willing to take adventures in their careers, to not put themselves into boxes. And I think that's also something we're going to talk about during the conversation. I think it's a very interesting angle to get from all the experienced people on the panel here.
Excellent. Okay. You may want to mute your phone, I think, although you gave me some background. Let's go over to Dana. And Dana and I, we met, like most of you, we met via LinkedIn, although Fatima and I had met before when I was visiting the UAE a couple of years ago. But Dana, interesting perspective. What are you doing to ensure that you are a good ancestor? And by the way, this is being recorded. So 50 years from now, someone's going to play this tape and say, oh, listen, Gabriela said this, or Olu said this, or Klidu said this. So be careful. Whatever you say, you're going to be held accountable by a future generation. Dana, what are you doing to be a good ancestor? You're on mute, Dana. You're on mute. There we go.
All right. No pressure put on us there, Lawrence. But thank you so much for the invitation to contribute. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with all of you here today. I think that what I would like to, the way in which I would like to provide expansive narratives for future generations. Some of the work that I've been investigating recently is on the anti-fragile mindset. I think it's very important because our future generations are going to have so many complex global challenges, including, climate change, to deal with, that having a worldview that empowers them to go through crisis and become stronger on the other side is very important. And also we are building, from the company perspective, we're building a next generation education platform to actually give youth the power and the tools to learn what they can do and enable them to make a difference as they're growing up. So thank you
so much. Thanks, Dana. We'll come back to this sort of evolutionary thinking that you're spurring through your company. My good friend Klidus, you are in St. Lucia. I'm happy to see you, given what's going on with regards to the volcano. So I'm glad that you're okay. So tell us, what are you doing to be a good ancestor?
Right. Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening to all the panelists and the participants joining us around the globe. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Lawrence. Always a pleasure to chat with you, whether it's online or in person. We look forward to welcoming you again to the sunny shores of the Caribbean sometime soon. So thank you for this opportunity. I think I could probably start at the personal level. I am trying to be a good dad, first and foremost. I think ancestralship starts at the familial level. So I have a 15-year-old son who I'm trying to mentor and coach and to highlight in his mind and his heart the positive attributes of what it is to be St. Lucian, West Indian, and to appreciate his ancestry so that in the future he could have an appreciation of our time. And so that's at the personal domestic level. At the corporate level, CARELEC, as you know, is the Association of Caribbean Electric Utilities. We are undergoing a significant strategic repositioning and transformation over the last 3 to 4 years. We have changed up the structure, the membership, the governance of the organization. We could go on this for the next 15, 20 minutes, but suffice to say, we have repositioned the organization from what it was for the last 30 years of existence, which was an association of electric utilities, to now an association of electric energy solution providers, for which we now have IPPs in membership. We never had that category for the first 30 years of existence of the organization. And now we have a separate membership category and also representation on the board of directors of independent power producers in our membership. So that's one of the significant things that we're doing, given the shifts in the market and how the technology is driving us, that we could chat a little bit more about later in terms of the intergenerational issues that we face. Thanks.
Thank you, Cletus. And I'm pleased to say that we'll soon be joined by Ambassador Christensen, so he's here, so he'll be joining us. Perfect timing. Fatima, you get the award for being up late because you're calling from the UAE. So that's, what are you doing to be a good ancestor?
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. Since we met a few years back, I keep moving from different government role, between federal and local government, and mainly what we are doing here in Department of Energy in Abu Dhabi, or what I have been doing since few years actually. Representing the government, what we are doing is we're setting a long-term policy for energy considering the climate change, and that is including the development of renewable energy strategy, clean energy, CO2 reduction, electrification, and that's an area where we are focusing now, especially increase the penetration of electric vehicle. Also, nowadays we are doing the analysis of the hydrogen to introduce the hydrogen. That's not the only thing. We are conducting different scenarios to know what will be the future for long term. I've been also, or last year, the UAE government has named the year 2020 as the year for preparation for coming 50 years. So for all the sectorial strategies, and that include the energy, we've been participating on this strategy. So we are taking the nation for the future, inshallah.
Thank you, Fatima. And it's interesting that you're already putting in place a 50-year plan. And so we will eventually get to Ambassador Christensen, but I want to go to Minister Toure now. Minister Toure, you're calling from Mali, beautiful country. What are you doing to be a good ancestor?
Well, I'm already an ancestor, so that's what you're talking when you talk about generation gap here. Well, I'm really happy to be with this very young, bright team. I like to be surrounded by people more smarter than me, so I'm really glad to be here. And Lavrance, our good friend Lamin Savadogo, has spoken very highly of you, so I'm really glad he's a common friend. So I'm really delighted to be here. As you know, I'm a satellite engineer by background, and I find myself at the end of my career now running the communication and communication technology here in Mali, in my country. And prior to that, I had the chance to lead the International Telecommunication Union as Secretary General. I spent 16 years in Geneva leading the organization, and later on, I was tasked to put together a strategy for Africa to create a single digital market for Africa, which of course takes into account most of the biggest challenges like energy as well, and making sure that countries in Africa work together, not in silos, because we together individually we are 52 small markets, and if we come all together, we're going to be one single big market that is attractive to industry. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do now when I'm leading the country's information and communication technology sector. During a transitional time, we are in a very challenging moment and of our history, where we're trying to really put the country back together after some years of turmoil. Now, personally, I've been following the COPs, the climate change discussions since COP16 in Amsterdam. And I was amazed by the way discussions were going on. I mean, people were busier trying to find who's to be blamed for the climate change rather than trying to get out of it. And I'm from a developing country that is looking at solutions, first to produce energy, to transport energy, to store energy, and to use energy. Those are the greatest challenges. Being in the ICT sector makes it very interesting because, as you know, electricity is a foundation for any developed country's development. It's a foundation for industry. And energy brings everything else. And here in developing countries, it's telephones, telecommunications that brings energy. On the contrary, because in remote villages where there is no electricity at all, people wanted to have electricity because they wanted to charge their phones. And that's how it started. And we're trying to put the challenge on them so that electricity will not be just for lightning. Light is okay, but it has to be used as a tool for development. And those are some of the challenges we're facing. And I'm trying to work with startups, young groups, so that they come together and use their innovative and creativities, innovative minds to come together to try and do something that we conceive here, finding solutions locally.
Well, thank you so much. I want to now go over to Ambassador Christensen. Ambassador, thanks for joining us, and thank you for stepping in for Minister Jorgensen. But as I read your bio, I realized that either one of you could have done a good job. So it's nice having you here. So maybe you can begin by telling us what are you doing to be a good ancestor, but then also maybe tell us from the Danish perspective in terms of climate policies, what is Denmark doing to incorporate future generations? And then I'd like the rest of the panelists to start thinking about that very same question, because I'm going to come back to you and start getting into a little bit more hardball question about where we're going to go with this intergenerational dialogue. So first, Ambassador Christensen.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you for inviting Denmark to be part of this conversation. Can I start with your last question first? Because in a way, that naturally then segues to what I'm doing to be a good ancestor. The Danish government came into office 2 years ago based on an election that was really a landslide election, not to the left or the right, but to the green and to climate. And it was the first climate election we've had ever. For more than 20 years, Danish politics has been decided by questions around immigration and foreigners and how we're dealing with non-Christian neighbors in Europe and stuff like that. To everyone's big surprise, the population actually got really tired of discussing those same old things, which were being monopolized by the extremes and run for whatever purposes. So both the youth, but also the old, they got together and mounted a campaign, starting with a petition from citizens in Parliament, asking for us to put in place a climate law with an ambition to reduce emissions by 70% in 2030. And politicians didn't really take that seriously, but this movement, this momentum from bottom up really got wind in its sails, and in the end ended up deciding the election. And our current government is led by the Social Democrats. They campaigned on a platform with a 60% reduction, but because of the way the majority in Parliament is composed, in the end, they had to make the 70% reduction their policy as well to have a governing majority. And for 2 years now, the government, with its and actually supported now by the whole of Parliament, has been busy during lockdown to put in place, first of all, the law setting the target of 70% reduction and, of course, climate neutrality by 2050, but then also implementing those through, number one, policy tracks on energy transformation, industry transformation, transport, agriculture, a tax reform, and circular economy. But then secondly, 13 public-private partnerships with the whole private sector in Denmark, all major CEOs in industry stepping up to the plate and saying, we want to be part of this transformation. We believe that it's not only good business in Denmark, but actually for our profile globally, that's a fantastic brand to be a part of, and we want to step in, whether we're in pharmaceuticals or shipping or energy or plastics. We all want to join in. And then on top of that, we created a government-funded but hands-off climate council of experts and citizens that every year are doing a monitoring of our efforts, and as part of the governance have to report back to the public on how we're doing and implementing everything we've said we would do, so that the government every year in Parliament can put forward a climate program for the next budget year to say how we will implement it. And as part of that, also a youth council focused on intergenerational justice that in a way also gives input to this. And this whole governance system is in place for the next 10 years. And the first step that was taken was to put in place a mega project, a moonshot of building 2 energy islands in the ocean outside Denmark, with a total offshore wind capacity of 150% of our current needs, with a view to not only producing enough green electricity to keep us going, even if needs go up, but also to produce a green hydrogen, what Fatima was talking about, in order to transform industry and heavy-duty transport and shipping. Denmark being the home of Maersk, the world's largest shipping line. Maersk have set a target of zero carbon shipping by 2050, and they're having their first emission-free ship sailing already in 2 years. And so it's sort of a whole of government, whole of society effort to really get the whole country to trailblaze ahead of the curve on this. And in a way, that's our youth speaking to the oldest people in society, but then bringing the whole country with them. My role in this, to get to your first question, is to leverage all of that energy and all of that enthusiasm into impact on the global stage. To work with Minister Jorgensen, our Prime Minister, our Minister, we have 8 ministers in total who are working on the global aspects of this, and we have a steering group that I chair. We have a global strategy that I was in charge of putting together, and then the implementation in working with major emitters on reductions, but also with adaptation, with also focusing on Africa, energy access in Africa, but also on finance. We have doubled our climate finance over the last 3 years, and we are revising our strategy for financing, and we'll ramp it up further with the budget for next year. And then also working, as I said, with business on the global scale. So my role is sort of to be the driver in the engine room of making that happen. And it's a really exciting time to be part of the Danish government. So thanks for asking.
Thank you. We will come back to that, because I want to talk a little bit about what Denmark is doing as part of the IEA task force on making sure that the transition is just. So I want to go now to intergenerational, what I call inequities. And I'm going to ask each of you to reflect on it and give your perspective. I'm going to start with Fatima. Obviously, Fatima, you've been at the forefront of a lot of the work in the region. And in terms of intergenerational inequities, what are some of the things you think about when that word is used, intergenerational inequities, in the context of energy and climate?
That reminds me with how to engage the question we had when we almost finalized or going for the government approval on the energy strategy. The question was that we need to stress test the strategy. And we did design somehow a game to test this, and have 9 groups to do this game. And we thought of selecting the stakeholders who should represent different view. And at that time, the government has appointed a youth minister of youth, who she was on 20s, early 20s. And that inspired us that we need to have the youth representation. So we were having a youth representation on the even decision making for the energy, for the future of energy in the country by 2050. I do feel that, at least in my country, we have done a lot of activity related to the intergenerational. Let me say that it's not a gap, but before the gap, we anticipated that we need to engage the new generation, and that's why we have a decree from the cabinet to have in our country, we have many companies that is owned by the government. Mainly the government is doing the business in many of the giant companies, and there is a decree that to have the youth, a representative from the youth in the board of directors. As I said, we have a minister of youth, and also we are engaging the youth through Youth Council. We are a federation of 7 emirates, so we have for each emirate one council of youth, and they are participating in making different decisions. So I don't see it as a gap, except that the generation expectation. So if this discussion happened before the COVID-19, I think that will be very difficult, because the difference in technology, for example, and this is what I'm thinking of, which is I can see that before the COVID, that there was a gap, or it's not a gap, but it's a technology divide between different generations. And I think one of the benefits of COVID, I think the gap has been, if not eliminated, at least minimized. So it's the technology is the most important thing. Yes, there is different in preferred communication channel, but now with after the 1.5 years of COVID, I think that has been minimized.
It's interesting you say that one of the things COVID has done is it has reduced the digital divide across the generations, and I tend to agree with you, because whether it's a church service or it's a ceremony, or it's going to the mosque or whatever it is, people are using Zoom for communications on all different levels. And I know I'll come to you, Dana, because I know you have some views on this use of digital technology. But before I do that, let's go to Cledus. Cledus, you're in the Caribbean, lots of small islands, where I believe the intergenerational issue is very, very important. What's your perspective on intergenerational inequity from energy and climate in the context of the Caribbean?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lawrence. And it really is one that is very relevant to our experience. Our experience is such that knowledge has been passed through generations, through storytelling, through art forms, through music, another form of artistic expression, which we needed historically, obviously, to supplement the history books that were written for us, about us, but not by us. And so the concept of intergenerational knowledge transfer is very critical, and it's at a pivotal juncture. Fatima alluded to the issue of technology and social media that has become very prevalent in this generation, and we expect to continue in future generations. So our challenge is, how do we embrace these new technologies to sort of supplement and maybe replace the traditional forms of storytelling and artistic forms. We have the calypso and other artistic expressions of knowledge and information, including issues related to climate change, I must add. All societal issues and challenges are expressed in storytelling and artistic expressions in the Caribbean. At least we have calypsos and music and art and theater, dance even, that give expression to the everyday challenges of our people. And so what Carolec is trying to do, Lawrence, just as we did for the institutionalization. We're looking at institutionalization of knowledge management, basically, so that this knowledge remains within the construct of an institution that could pass it on in a very meaningful, intentional, and deliberate way. So again, we are going back to structure and processes. We are taking a proposal to our board later this year for the first time to have an individual membership category of the association, which again, for the last 32 years, was that of corporations being members. So we intend to have an individual membership category, and through that, we will have student membership as one subset of that. Student membership, undergrad and postgrad. We'll have an academic researcher category. We'll have an industry practitioner category, and we'll have an honorary membership category where we will induct lifetime honorary members. And the purpose of that is to go back to the idea of institutionalizing knowledge management and knowledge transfer. We've seen, for example, the last 4 years that I've been with the organization, many chief executive officers come and go. The rate of turnover is quite high at that level. It's a very intense sector, as you may know, especially in a small island economy. If the lights go off for more than 2 hours, somebody gets sent home. Well, not quite, but there is great accountability. And so what we are seeing is lots of knowledge just walking out the door. And what we are saying, Lawrence and panelists, if we can't even retain knowledge within this generation, what hope do we have for the intergenerational continuity of issues? So our task is to at least ensure that there is knowledge management, knowledge transfer, succession planning, at least within our lifetime, that would increase the chances of it being therefore intergenerational beyond our lifetime. And that's what we're looking at by having this new membership category, where we hope to interplay student membership with stalwarts of the industry through honorary lifetime membership, so that we could continue that rich dialogue, coming up with solutions and best practices for the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Clearly, we'll come back to the point you made regarding knowledge transfer. Especially, I want to have a conversation with Ambassador Christensen about that from the Scandinavian perspective. But before we go back, let's go to Dana. Dana, what's your perspective on intergenerational inequalities in the context of energy and climate from your vantage point? You're on mute.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I was fortunate in grad school that I had a Hungarian mentor, a pioneer in the area of evolutionary systems design. And he started every class, any type of collaborative process, by actually putting a physical chair in the space and saying, this is the space of the future generations. So very early on in my education process, this idea of representing the future was in the process, built into the process of my education. And I remember years ago, the United Nations put out a call for ideas on how could they make improvements. And I had sent a video saying that they should put an actual physical chair in place for all the discussions representing the future generations. So I strongly feel, and I'm excited by the fact that, as our guests have talked about, that the pandemic has kind of collapsed the digital divide, at least in some degree. And in this way, we can't, so it's not so easy to disinclude children, youth, future generations, because it is so easy to invite them to participate. They do know how to use these tools, and they do have strong opinions, and they do have a lot at stake. One of the things that's a big inequity is, they may be alive to see the last tiger. I mean, there's supposedly less than 300 tigers left in the world. This is all, interdependent, all of the global challenges, all of the SDGs. And one of our challenges is, yes, how can we work across the challenges in such a way that we preserve the legacy of this planet that our ancestors have left to us, and at the same time focus on empowering young people with the abilities that they can use technologies and that we are listening to their voice. Because I think one of the biggest challenges is hypocrisy. Young people are really the first to call out, hypocrisy. And when they learn what that means, they kind of see it everywhere. And that's something that we as adults have to answer to.
Oh, thank you. Let's go over to Olu. So Olu, you started off by saying you were going to learn from this August audience or August panel with the ambassador, the minister, and Dana and Perus. But actually, I want them to learn from you. And so you tell us, what are you hearing? You have your own podcast. You talk to a lot of young people around the world. What are you hearing about the intergenerational inequities that seem to exist in the energy and climate sphere? And specifically, you're from Nigeria, but you're based in Dubai, I believe. And so you have a very unique perspective. So take an opportunity to talk to Dr. Toure and to Minister Ambassador Christensen. Tell them what you're hearing the young people say about this inequity. Talk to them. There's your opportunity. Tell them.
Thank you for that, Lawrence. So I'm actually based in Qatar right now, and this is very interesting because I feel most of the time it's very difficult to put yourself in the shoes of many of these young people. So just to give some context, you have to imagine what it's going to be like for students who graduated in 2019 or 2020, what it's like graduating into a global pandemic. And then you look at what the context of what they're graduating into. Apart from the pandemic, you have the world is becoming a lot more connected, and we have technology as Dana mentioned. So a lot more opportunities are becoming global competition. So right now, I recently started working for a nonprofit in Canada. It's called Student Energy, and we're working on a program that helps young people to enter the workforce. And to the credit of Ambassador Christensen, the program is actually partly funded by the government of Denmark. So Denmark has been very active in the space, and it's very, very true what it says about their support for youth. But the problem is that is still not enough. So young people graduating right now are faced with a lot of challenges. A lot of the opportunities that would usually be entry level no longer exist. I have people who have been displaced, people who have in the middle of the career have been displaced, are willing to work for less. So you have more competition and more global competition for young people as well. And since the energy transition is happening so quickly all around the world, the curriculum in the schools are not able to teach them the skills they need to become immediately valuable in the workforce, which usually is what the entry-level roles are supposed to teach them. So now you have the situation where they're graduating not only into a pandemic, but they have outdated skills from a sector that is very rapidly transitioning, and that just makes it very difficult for them to really find their place. And this is something that could affect them for a very long time. So it could have lingering effects that can affect the first 2-3 years of their careers. And then it leaves them in a very awkward position. And this is something that's affecting a lot of young people from around the world right now. So on the podcast that I run, a lot of the people who listen to it are very young people. So a majority of our audience is between 18 and 27. So most of them are either doing their undergraduate or PhD programs. And everybody is so unsure. There's this anxiety in them because we know that there's a lot of problems that needs to be solved in the African context alone. For us to achieve Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 alone, we need to have at least a lot of money pouring in, but not just that. Just from the perspective of the workforce, we need to have at least like 10% of Africans working in the renewable energy space, but they don't have the skills actively to do that yet. So, like, if you just think about the problem statements that we all know in our heads and the actual resources and the amount of people that needs going to be solving it, there's this huge gap. And I think young people really don't know where they fit into that and the resources to support them, even with a lot of great initiatives around the world. And the government of Denmark, as I said, funding really great programs, is still not enough. And I feel many people aren't really conscious of that because it's difficult to put yourself in that kind of position when it seems so very far away from where you are currently.
Thanks, Olu. We'll come back to you, Olu. I want to go to Gabrielle, but before I do that, let me just plant the seed for Ambassador Christensen and Minister Toure. I would like for you both to be prepared to reflect on what you've heard from the panel so far. So we'll come back to you first, Minister Toure, and then Ambassador Christensen to reflect on the comments you're hearing from the rest of the panel. Gabrielle, your perspective in terms of the inequalities you see around intergenerational from the standpoint of climate and energy.
Thank you, Lawrence. I'm based in London, right? Climate Earth is a London-based green fintech. So we do a lot of research on the solutions that could decarbonize the planet. That's our only purpose, right? Our laser focus. So what products and services move us away from the business as usual based on fossil fuel solutions, and the alternatives, right? So again, the moving away from internal combustion engine cars to electric vehicles. And then we look deeper. It's all about the adoption of these solutions, and it's the so-called S-shaped curve, right? We're at the bottom of this very big seismic shift as we adopt these technologies that they are already it makes sense from an economic point of view. Internal combustion engine cars are about to be at parity with electric vehicles. As we know, solar and wind are already more competitive than natural gas and coal. So they make solar rooftop, for example, a company in the US that epitomizes that idea called Sunrun, right? It's the behind the meter solution. So you're going to have your solar rooftop with potential through 3 Tesla power walls and your electric vehicle with a vehicle to grid solution connected to that, and then heat pumps as opposed to boilers heating your house by burning methane. So that house of the future is here. So we look very much at what are the companies that are supplying these solutions and how these technologies are being adopted. And then there's this very exciting story of the convergence of technologies, right? So this house of the future that I just described with the solar rooftops and the battery storage and the electric vehicle to grid with the heat pumps. Well, the house is here, and that house is very much connected by 5G and the Internet of Things, right? It's all data. So young generations, they don't have a disposable income. Some of them don't have, the big houses and many kids. But they embrace the solutions, and we look across. It's not just about electric vehicles and renewable energy. We look across very relevant solutions. Telepresence, right, Lawrence? You were talking about Zoom. Now a household name, was not before COVID. And plant-based diet, right? Beyond Meat burgers, for example. Recycling, and the extent that you go, put a lot of effort into that process. We see market research indicating that the adoption of these solutions, microtransportation, the electric scooters, right? The younger generations, they walk the walk and talk the talk, right? They embrace these solutions. They live that way. I can tell you anecdotal evidence. We're a small team of 12 people. All my analysts are in their 20s. Most of them come from Imperial College in London. They're vegan. They would refuse to drink water from a plastic bottle, right? They spend all their waking hours researching battery solutions and how Fatima's point, how renewable energy is going to power this rise in the green hydrogen, right? So how the green electrons are going to create the green molecules that potentially will then go back to the green electrons. They live and breathe, right? That's their life. So they're putting their careers in line with their values, and they live their lives by these solutions. So they embrace them, and they embrace them with passion, which makes me very hopeful for the future. Lawrence, you're on mute.
I caught myself, so I was on mute this time. So what I was basically saying was, I like your comments. Now, I'm going to come back to each of you and push back a little bit, because that's what I do. But before I do that, Minister Touré, what you've heard so far, your reflections, and then from an African perspective, Dana Gabrielle talked about electric vehicles and electric scooter. How can you have an EV when you don't have a power coming from the grid? So can you talk about the inequalities from an African perspective based on what you've heard so far? Then we'll go to Ambassador Christensen.
Look here, these are the type of positive vibrations that I was expecting from these young people, and that's to make the whole difference. I've been saying that the current generation feel that they're part of the solution, while the older generation were feeling that they're part of the problem. And that was a big difference. And that's the thing. And that's what gives hope today. And I think that there are positive ways of looking at problems. Any problem has a solution if it's not a false problem, and then it's not a problem anymore. But I believe that we have wasted a lot of time. That's what I mentioned in my first remarks, that from COP16 when I saw people where there was a turning point there in Amsterdam, okay, back then, because people were trying to blame one another. Now we're trying to find solutions to get out of this thing. COVID-19 came and shown that with information and communication technologies, a lot can be done. I haven't traveled for the past 13 months, okay? I was, during my career, I've traveled 180 countries. You know, I have never spent a month in the same place, completely in the same city. 1 month, full month. Now I'm 13 months, but I feel that I've been productive. I've been able to reach all my goals, and I'm sharing this with the younger people. We are in this couple of weeks to come. On April 22nd, I have Girls in ICT Day organized countrywide here, organizing contests with all girls and women, bringing solutions for. We have picked just two issues: energy and agriculture, and they're bringing the solutions to that. Next month, the week of May 17th, I have a countrywide contest about from all the startups to bring in solutions that can showcase in order to find solutions to local problems. I'm fortunate. I'm in a government where I don't need to convince my other fellow ministers of the need of use of new technologies, and they are already converted. And especially we're working with Ministry of Education to try and embed those solutions in the culture and the curriculum of the education system, so that young people start thinking positive and they start thinking on solutions on green things. These young people, you see them now coming home and asking their parents, "Oh, why are we using this? Why are we doing this way?" And these are the type of transformational change that we're seeing here, and that we need to inject in our society. And I think that our government is busy doing that, and I think that will take us prepare the stage for the younger generation to be more competitive on the global stage.
Thank you. Ambassador Christensen, for full disclosure, when I put together this panel, I did not know that Denmark was supporting Ulu's organization in Canada. So I had no knowledge of that. So this is all just by design, if you may. I had no pre-knowledge. But coming to you, Ambassador, why don't you talk about what you've heard so far, and specifically as it relates to Denmark, a small country doing big things. How can African countries and countries in the emerging economies, how can they learn from Denmark's experience of being a small country now dominating the world of renewables? First, what you've heard so far, and then specifically, what can the rest of the smaller nations learn from a country like Denmark?
Well, Lawrence, I don't think it's our place to in that sense, teach others what to do. Everyone have to find their own path. But taking a cue from Dana, and I like your chair philosophy, Dana. It's a good one. I'm always myself thinking in sort of in terms of generations. That say, if you had everybody between me and Jesus in my family, if the generation is 25 years, it's only 40 people, right? I mean, Jesus was like yesterday in terms of the history of humanity on this planet, and still within the last 200 years, that's 8 people in my family. We've managed to go from stability in terms of the climate that we live in as humans on this planet, to a situation where, according to NOAA, the latest measurements last year tell us that we have as much CO2 equivalents in the atmosphere as we haven't had for 3.6 million years. 3.6 million years ago, the ocean was 80 feet higher than it is today, and Denmark was covered by a tropical ocean. And when I think about, Lawrence, my ancestors, or what I'm hearing from people on here, it is really that we need to put human ingenuity into overdrive and work on the solutions that a country like mine can help put in place. And we are so confident in the green transition that we've even taken the step to decide to end our oil and gas production. We are the largest oil and gas producer in the European Union, but we have decided to end production to be in line with the Paris Agreement before 2050, and it probably will happen maybe already 10 years earlier. And I would actually invite my colleagues, and especially my Fatima from the UAE, that shouldn't we think together, Fatima, on how to, in a way, take those steps forward, how countries that have or are dependent on oil and gas can also become first movers and front movers in showing the way ahead, because we have much more sun and wind on our planet that can actually provide the fuel for all of us. And I think, to your question about Africa, Lawrence, I think Africa is the sunniest continent of them all. And if we really put that sun and that wind that you have, Minister, to use, we can power the whole continent for billions of people, and we can create energy, we can create water, we can create food. There's no shortage in terms of that if we put it to the right use. And that's also where I hear Olo. I feel your pain, Olo. I have 2 children myself who are students, and they're suffering right now. And one of them has postponed finishing her studies because she doesn't believe there's a job for her out there, and she couldn't face ending her studies. And the other one had to take a gap semester because she couldn't face not being a part of a social community in terms of studying. But I mean, this will end. And at the end of this, we have to use your mind and your friends' minds to drive this change that is already out there, but which can go much faster. And for that, we need all the best minds, especially in Africa, especially in the South. We need to, your capacity to work in your own countries. Don't migrate to Europe. Don't go to the US. Stay at home. Help drive change in Africa. That's where the future lies, and I think it can be done, Lawrence. I truly believe so, if we put all our minds together.
And that is the big if, right? Coming together. As we speak, on Thursday, President Biden is bringing together 40 world leaders to talk about climate change and what needs to happen. And so we're going to start with Dana. Dana, you're going to be sitting in that room. Imagine for a second, each of you are now sitting at the table, and you're now going to bring an intergenerational view to the 40 world leaders, excluding the Prime Minister of Denmark, who will get his advice from Thomas. So, but the rest of you, let's start with Dana. If you're in that room, what concrete step would you say the global leaders should do to make parity among intergenerational citizens a reality? So if you're there, what issue would you bring to the forefront that you think they should focus on? Each of you get a minute to respond, starting with you, Dana. You're on mute, Dana.
Maybe I'll learn by the end of this to unmute. The biggest issue that I would bring to the table would be education, that we need to change the education systems to include a larger focus on 3 areas. 1, bonding with the natural world and the environment, because only through experiences in and with the environment are people moved to act on behalf of the environment. We have good psychological science behind that. 2, because they will be facing a lot of crises, no matter what we do. The anti-fragile mindset, leadership are very important. And 3, digital citizenship, because it's really a real threat that our youth don't get trapped in artificial realities, virtual realities, spend all of their time in gaming and actually withdraw from the challenges. So they need to have information about the power of these tools and how they can use these tools. I like to say, like a Jedi uses a lightsaber, and I believe that if they realize the power that they hold in their hand, some do, right? Fridays for Future movement, and many of the young people do realize the power, and that's what's gotten them on the stage at this point, is using technology wisely. I think all young people need to be taught the value of these tools, and also the way that it uses, it uses us. And so to prepare for that and to understand that it can become an addiction, and that they can learn how to learn mindfulness and other skills so that they use this power wisely instead of letting it use them. So I think if we could build those three things into our education systems, we can have a stronger, more powerful youth in the future.
What advice or what would you bring to the table for that conversation with those world leaders? One or two things you will suggest to them. Olu?
Well, I support very heavily what Dina was talking about. So specifically, I'm going to speak from the context of sub-Saharan Africa. So we're still dealing with this energy access challenge, and we still have this 2030 goal. Recently, on my podcast, I spoke to Damela Ogumbi. She's the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All, and we're just talking about how this challenge is really coming to the forefront because it's just 9 years away now, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And we're just looking at the gap that exists with the financing and how difficult it is to mobilize because a lot of the large financial institutions want big projects that they can put a lot of money into and don't want to do that due diligence process with like small $10,000 mini grid around Africa. So like just taking it away from what is practical and what is ideal, and really making it possible to address the investment in human capital, which is something that I'm always very insistent on. So because of the challenges in sub-Saharan Africa right now, a lot of entrepreneurs are taking this challenge. They are starting their own companies. But some of the time as well, you realize that the issues with scale sometimes comes from bad policy environments and the government's not truly supporting them. In Nigeria, for instance, we have the few subsidies still supporting the oil and gas the oil and gas industry for a very long time, and the same government support, at least not to the level that it has given to the oil and gas industry in the past, really been shown for that. And when you look at the divide, the entry barrier for the oil and gas industry has been very high. So a lot of the brightest and the most intelligent young people have gone to the solar industry, but they still don't have that support. They still can't attract the right amount of funding. A lot of solar companies are getting like $1 million in their Series A fund, but it's still not enough when you look at the context of the large oil and gas projects that exist in the African continent. So those are really the two things, really addressing that financing gap and investing in the right and brightest minds that are going to solve these challenges, because I believe the solutions is going to come from us, but the government needs to at least not be in the way.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. Financing is going to be key. Gabrielle, what would you offer to those world leaders this week Thursday if you were in the room?
Well, I would urge them to have a very clear metric, right? We need to track where we are. We need to quantify, as cheesy as it sounds, if it gets measured, it gets managed, right? And for us, that metric is potential avoided emissions in gigatons of CO2 equivalent. There is a very solid framework developed by Dennis Pamling and Mission Innovation. We have the EU taxonomy soon to be in place. Hopefully, SEC in the US will follow suit. We have, for example, Project Drawdown, Paul Hawken, that quantified that roadmap to carbon neutrality by 2050. 100 technologies, existing technologies that could be scaled up to bring us to that point of zero emission by 2050. We need to quantify where are we, right? So how many electric vehicles are to be built in what grids? If you're in China, right, the potential avoided emissions of that electric vehicle is very different if you are in Denmark or in California. We need to quantify this. We need to then build up that roadmap and understand where the gaps are, the easy to abate solutions and the not easy to abate industries, right? Where will green hydrogen, to Fatima's point, right? Is this a very long-term trend? What will be the very first big milestone for green hydrogen? We are doing research. We think it will be fundamental in solving renewable energy intermittence, right? We're going to be able to store solar and wind that otherwise would have been curtailed, right, in hydrogens. But where do we go from there? Transporting hydrogen is not easy. Then we have to convert that into ammonia and store ammonia. So we need to quantify that, but we can never lose track of what is relevant. Why are we doing all this? To decarbonize. So we need to understand the relevance of each solution. So that for us is potential avoided emissions. We need to embrace a metric. When we go on a diet, many of you may not appreciate this analogy, but when you go on a diet, you know exactly how many calories you need to cut, how many, how much you can eat, how much you need to burn, right? These need to become household numbers and figures. We all need to be able to talk about our 56 gigatons of emissions and our 2030 milestone of cutting that by half, and what that, so those numbers need to be in everybody's minds. We're all in this together. So it's about quantifying. So I would urge all governments at all levels in all countries to speak the same language, and that is the tangible metric. The emission is the problem. We need to quantify. We need to see what is going to move us away from that business as usual based on that fossil fuel, right? What are the relevant solutions? And let's embrace those. So if we don't have a very clear metric to quantify the relevance of those solutions, right, we're not going to be maximizing our chances and increasing the probability that we'll get there, and that would that way minimize the risks of climate change. So a clear, one thing and one thing only, a clean, clear, tangible metric, potential avoided emissions.
That's very good. And the good thing is the younger generation, we all are used to having our smart devices, so having a lot of data coming to you is not an issue. However, I would just caution that understanding the fundamentals is also very important. So just getting the data is not enough. So Cletus from the Caribbean, what would you offer for President Biden and his friends of leaders from around the world? You're on mute, Cletus.
I wish I had it directly, but this is good as any forum. I think appreciating the context of the region, emerging democracies, in some cases still fledgling in a sense, not in terms of the capacity or human resource development, but in terms of institutional strengthening. And that's perhaps one of the biggest challenges that we see, Lawrence. In the region, we have brilliant young minds, brilliant mature minds, but the institutions that are required to have a sustained effort towards transitioning are somewhat deficient. And I'd say this obviously not in a disparaging sense, but in the sense that we really need to look more closely at our governance structures, our legislative and regulatory frameworks, and the mechanisms that are needed to have a sustained effort at transitioning. One of the major setbacks, as per your previous talk on intergenerational and overcoming short-termism, as it was put in your discussion earlier with Roman, was the question of, for example, the political cycles, which is 4 to 5 years in most parts of the world, and in particular in this region, Lawrence. That somewhat almost militates against any long-term view of issues. And of course, the issue of climate change and energy transition is, of it by its very nature, a long-term issue. So to combat that, we need to strengthen the institutions of governance broadly, not just government, civil society as well, so that this effort and this dialogue moving into action, not just dialogue, but moving into action, evidence-based policy formulation within the context of a predictable and stable regulatory and legislative framework could sustain the changes that are needed at the technical level. We don't have a problem with the technology. There's not so much a problem with the capacity of the people. It is really the core at the institutional strengthening level, I would say. The focus is required, and there where we need some assistance and support.
So, Fatima, building on what Cletus just said, in terms of the UAE and that region, you talked about having established a youth council. What would you offer President Biden and his folks as it relates to intergenerational issues from your perspective?
Okay, so first of all, I will just going through the reply of my friends on your question. I think I'm thinking of it as all of the above, but there is one thing that we should look into the earth as one country, as our country, because there is no border when it comes to, we have to support each other. So there should be a program or initiatives that support to finance, support to technology, support of knowledge, so that we can develop we can achieve our target for climate change, either carbon neutrality or net zero carbon. But definitely there should be a platform where all countries support each other. It's one earth. There is no border for the CO2, and that's what I do believe for the first or for the question you have addressed to my friends. Going to intergenerational, I think what we need is to consider how to communicate to the youth, especially because I've been in the discussion of COP, and every time we have those protests from youth representation. But what we need is to use the youth energy in, first of all, guiding them to be a role. They should be a role model for the emission reduction by reducing their energy utilization, reducing their transport, taking their right food or sustainable food, those kind of things, rather than only protesting. So there should be a way of engagement, how to have the youth representation on the decision making during this negotiation of the COP.
That's a very interesting point you brought up. One of the questions I had for the group was to talk about what is the responsibility of the youth themselves, of the young people themselves, in making a difference beyond demonstration. What else can you do? And specifically, I was thinking about how can the young people in the developed countries work in a way to support their peers in the developing countries. But let's go to Minister Toure. Minister Toure, I'd like to get from you, since you said, I didn't ask you, you talked about yourself. You said you were up in age, like you said, right? So when you were younger, what did you do differently that you see the young people today not doing? And I would ask the same question to Ambassador Christensen. When you were a youth, did you have the same level of dynamism to change the world like you're hearing from the young people today?
Yeah, that was not a long time ago. I stopped counting after age 40, so I'm just 40 years old and plus 27 years of experience, more experience. Let me tell you, you were previously asking what people would ask President Biden to say. And of course, being from a developing country, I wouldn't dare to give him any advice, and knowing also that he has a lot of problems locally. And someone I admire very much, and I believe that all problems should be resolved at local level. First of all, we have to start thinking from within, and that's exactly what I'm telling the youth here today. I'm telling them that we are in the age of information and communication technology, which is driven by the human brain. And there is no nation, race, culture, or continent, or religion, or whatever, that has more or less of that brain. Those brains need to be trained and need to be driven and give them the hope so that they can use the best of them. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do here locally, so that I give confidence to my people, so that the young people don't think of going abroad for finding a greener field, which is not, it's a mirage in reality. Having been out of the country myself for a very, very long time, I know that for the fact. And therefore, I'm trying to give them the opportunity to try and monetize their creativity, their ideas here, so that they see that there is hope here at home, and they find local solutions to local problems. And that's exactly what my field is doing. And as a minister, government minister, I think it's my duty to work with my other fellow ministers to try and inject that in the brains of our people. Organize everything from giving them opportunities to create startups and share their ideas. And in fact, this is one of the problems in Africa here. People don't share information. And information is the only thing, when you share it, it multiplies. And then, and therefore, I'm trying to put in that culture of sharing of information, first of all. And second, I'm trying to encourage the financing institutions to take risk in investing on those young people in their ideas. I mean, I'm giving the example of the Silicon Valley, where 80% of the startups fail within 3 years. They sign up for bankruptcy after 3 years. So 80%, but still, those 20% left, that's what we're seeing here as the internet giants and everything. And they dare to invest in people's ideas and make money with them. That's the type of culture I believe that we should inject here. And of course, in doing so, you have to put all the legal and regulatory framework. Somebody mentioned that here during the discussions. And I'm starting from there and putting really the right environment and teaching them to start thinking positive about themselves, about their future, about the country, so that really we can find solutions. And last but not least, I think there is another important topic that we haven't mentioned in this field, which is dominated by cybersecurity as well. It's a very huge topic, and young people tend to be very naive in the way they behave on the cyberspace, which is a blocking barrier for them for their evolution. But of course, that will be could be the theme for another topic later on. But I want to really give hope, give a chance to our people, our young people, and make sure that they really value what they have at home here. Africa is a beautiful continent. You know, we have everything. How we should start transforming our own natural resources locally first. That's first step. If we start with that, we will do a lot of things, and we will share our knowledge and the economy with the rest of the world. And therefore, I believe that Africa has a lot to offer to the world, and it's up to the leaders to really put the young people in the right track so that they can really behave in a manner that they feel that they are part and parcel of this global world, and they can really produce the best out of it. I've learned that. I've studied electrical engineering. I always say we didn't invent a transistor. You know, I've learned how it works, like in universities elsewhere. And I mean, I was beating some of the students. Some of them were beating me. So, you know, it's a brains everywhere. And therefore, we have to start making use of those things. And then I believe that giving them confidence is a first big step.
Good. So, Ambassador Christensen, I want you to respond to two quick questions, and then we're going to do two lightning rounds before we end. But Ambassador Christensen, this issue of investment that was brought up by Dr. Touré, the need to invest, and I know Denmark is doing quite a bit around the world in terms of investing. You've increased your aid. Is there anything else you think the OECD countries could be doing to tap into this youth potential, not just in Africa, but also in America, in Europe? What else can be done to get the young people really committed to climate change, not just from demonstration, but also going into those fields and working? What else can public policy people do, which could be an advice or suggestion for the G40 conversation that's going on right now?
Well, I would say bringing young people into the conversation everywhere where it's happening. Don't have it be a conversation amongst old men and women, but bring the youth to the table and empower them to be part of decision making and crafting of solutions, included in curricula, included in the education systems, and make sure that part of the investments also go in their direction. Lawrence, you asked about whether we had that optimism in our youth. I mean, I was a good student when the Berlin Wall came down. I grew up in Europe in the middle of the Cold War, where we had two fronts across from each other. I lived 100 miles from where some of the Pershing II missiles were put up, and I had friends who went to lie in front of the vehicles that were transporting the rockets into the sites. So we came out of the Cold War with a lot of optimism about the world. And in a way, the Rio conference, the climate convention came out of that optimism. The world was able to get together to look at common solutions. And in a way, we have to find that optimism again to get the youth engaged, to find solutions, to work together. And in a way, the irony of the climate negotiations is that we treat the negotiations as the real thing, and everything that's happening is a side event. But Lawrence, what an arrogance. The world, the real economy, what we're all doing is a side event to the negotiations. It's the other way around. In a way, the negotiations are a side event to the real world. And in a way, we need to get that balance right. Thanks.
Let's do a quick lightning round. And I'm going to ask very precise questions. And I don't just want yes, no answer. I want a yes with a very little explanation if you can, but keep it to, say, maybe 30 seconds, right? So question number one, do you think there's a trust gap between the generations? There's a lack of trust between the generations. Let's start with Fatima. Yes, no, and quick explanation why.
You said that we have to answer yes.
Well, yes, no, and then just a little bit why.
Actually, it's not, you cannot call it a lose of trust, but the way different generation is thinking create the feeling that there is no trust, or create that feeling of no trust. If we start knowing or using the same language, using the same communication, then I don't think it's everybody's working for a great goal, but it's just the way of thinking.
So way of thinking and language. Cletus, lack of trust between generations. Yes or no, and why?
I think yes, there is. I think for several reasons. It depends on the context, but I think one of the main reasons is I would say promises not kept, not fulfilled, and not sufficient transparency in terms of the affairs that are conducted on the behalf of the youth for the future and in the present. So I think if there were more transparency and accountability in governance, going back to the issue of strengthening institutions, accountability, and explaining why promises made are not kept, that would help in bridging the trust divide.
Okay. Dana, what about you?
I agree with what he just said, Cletus, that the problem is promises unkept. So I think, yes, there is a lack of trust, and that's something that we really need to work on.
Olu, what about you?
Yes, I also completely agree with what Cletus said. I think there is a huge lack of trust. And I think most of the time, the people who are doing climate protests sometimes are very characterized the wrong way. Although I don't appreciate, I don't think that everything youth can do is protest. I think there's a lot of active work that can be done. But when you realize the years and years of built up promises that haven't been kept, and people making decisions for our generation, thinking what's best for us, but without putting our best interest at the forefront, and more importantly, without giving youth a place at the table and a voice to speak out about what we really want and what's important to us. So I think that contributes really greatly to the lack of trust.
Gabriella?
I think there is lack of trust, but I think entrepreneurs are the utmost optimists. I think it's not widening. I think it is narrowing, and that is as we see politicians being very serious about it more and more. Entrepreneurs. Devoting capital to solve problems, as we see grandparents, eating plant-based diet. At least you don't need to become vegan, but you embrace that and you cut your consumption of red meat, for example. So as you observe tangible efforts across society, government, companies, families, right, that trust gets built, and then the gap becomes narrower. So I'm optimist.
Okay, Dr. Toure?
Yeah, I share Gabriela's optimism as well, and because we spend a lot of time, in fact, not talking to one another. We spend more time talking than listening, and I don't see much dialogues. I see many monologues, and that's where the gap is, and that's really we have to really start investing in listening, taking time to listen to others, and then we understand each other. And also, again, I said it in the beginning, we have to stop the blaming game. Who's to be blamed? No, let's try to find the solution. How to get out of it. I'm an engineer, so by background, I'm simply optimistic. I try to find a solution, how to make things work, instead of finding who's to be blamed on it. And I believe that that's what is, in our whole society, we are trying to find the wrong person to be blamed. And if we spend time to listen to one another, I think we have so many things in common, and it's just like in a couple as well,
Okay.
and really we have to invest in more listening to one another.
Okay. Ambassador Christensen, from you, lack of trust between the generations? Yes, no, why?
I don't think that it's that prevalent in Denmark. As I said initially, we had an election, and it actually did cause a groundswell of change. And we're now in a situation where we don't ask what is possible, but what is necessary. And then the task of our politicians is to make the necessary possible. And it's very tangible. The policies are being put in place. The change is visible. People can see it's happening, and that the level of ambition is even higher than what those politicians who came into power wanted to do. So not that much in my country, maybe.
And I just, before we do the last lightning round, Ambassador Christensen, it is also the case in Denmark, as it is, I know, in Sweden, where I lived before, that there's an age gap. I mean, a cap on how old you can be to work in the government, correct? You cannot be after 65, you cannot be in the government. Is that correct?
We removed that a few years ago.
Okay,
our workforce was getting too small, and they realized that people had to keep on working in order to maintain the welfare state.
Okay, good. Okay, listen, last round of questions, because we have to end here in about 2 minutes. This is a short one. So we started off by me asking you, what are you doing to be a good ancestor? We've had a very good conversation. We could spend another hour here, and we'll still have more time we'll still need more time to cover everything. So my last question to each of you is, now that you've heard what you've heard, what are you going to do differently to be better at being a good ancestor? So you started by saying you were doing a couple of different things. Now, I don't know what your government is doing. I want to hear from you specifically as an individual. What are you going to do differently or better to be a good ancestor? And I'm going to begin with Dr. Toure.
Well, first of all, let me just ask Thomas the permission to really quote him, because I like what he said when he's saying to make the necessary possible. That's really a great thing that I'm learning from this conversation. I'm really grateful. If you allow me, I'll quote you whenever I use this very nice quote. But I spend my time coaching young people just to be positive. And I spend time talking to even religious leaders in my country here, some of whom I'm older than. So I use the benefit of age to tell them that they have to think positive even when they are doing their prayers and blessings, you know. And that's something that I would like to continue to inject in my country. People lack confidence in themselves. I want them to see the future brighter than ever, and it's possible. And when they are given that hope, then I think they will succeed. If I had to do something differently, probably I'll stay more home here than abroad. But even that, I don't regret it, because I have learned a lot coming back from abroad, and I'm simply happy that I'm able to put that into motion here and implement something here in my country.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ture. Gabrielle, let's go to you. What will you do differently to be a good ancestor?
I like Dr. Ture was saying that we tend to monologue a lot, and I think that we've been preaching a lot the potential avoided emissions as a metric and the importance of having that tangible and clear roadmap. I think we need to engage more with people and ask them what they think about that, and if they feel as strongly as we do. So yeah, I'll definitely try to do more of that.
Thank you. Cletus, what about you?
Exactly, Gabriel. I agree with you. Dr. Torres' advice to listen more resonated with me. And to be a better ancestor, I think I will listen more both to my son and to my parents, both of whom I'm blessed to still be alive.
Good answer. Okay, Dana, what about you?
I think one of the main things that I've taken from this conversation is what Gabriella said about the quantification of carbon and our footprint in the sense that normally I work a lot on the qualitative side of the why should we care, and I think that bringing those two things together in a more dynamic way, particularly in this EdTech platform that we're working on, could be really powerful. So thank you.
Thanks. Olu, what about you?
Yes, I've really enjoyed the conversation. And so what I'm going to be doing, I think I always call myself privileged because I have a platform where I speak with a lot of really intelligent people, and I have a job that lets me lead. And it's very important because a lot of you today, they want the face at the table. So important to show up and to do your best work when you are at the table. So that pressure is always a motivation for me to keep working hard. And hopefully, I hope one day that I get the chance to export a lot of the learnings I've had, a lot of the great opportunities I've had back to Nigeria, and to really build out the solutions that are going to take us to our goals.
Thank you. Fatima?
Yes, I was thinking while we were discussing that we were focusing mainly on youth, to keep the youth talking, to listen to the youth. But you know what? I think it's time to think of intergenerational talk rather than getting from one side, from youth, and there is some wisdom. There is a wisdom, definitely, with other generation. And we should open for bi-directional talk rather than listening from youth. Maybe we have spent a lot of effort to make the youth talk and to listen to them. But it's time also to engage all generation.
Okay, and last word goes to Ambassador Christensen.
Lawrence, the challenge with seeing things through an ancestral lens is that people, politicians and others have done that for a long time, in a way, talking about taking action for their children or grandchildren. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of that time anymore. The future is now. And the 9 years we have for the SDGs start yesterday or 5 years ago. And climate change is happening so rapidly now that we have no luxury of thinking what we need to do in 20 years. If we want to arrive where we need to be in 20 years, we need to start working today. And I will carry that picture of the empty chair in the room with me, Dana's picture, because I think that's a very symbolic way of thinking about the presence of the future in the room, while I have to work every day even harder on making that future possible where that chair can be filled. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Christensen. What you didn't realize that if you just move Ambassador Christensen's picture to the right and pictures to the left, there's an empty space on the screen, and that space represents the chair. I didn't want to tell that to you, Dana, but I was anticipating that when I put together this panel. No, I'm just kidding. All right, listen, guys, it's been fantastic. I really enjoyed this. Thanks. We started a little bit late, so went a little bit over, but I think this has been a very stimulating conversation. I really want to thank Ambassador Christensen. Is late for you in Denmark. I know it's late for you also, Dr. Toure, and for Fatima, as well as for Olu, who is in Qatar. So thank you so much for joining us. I must say to you, if you're interested, we're going to be doing an intergenerational initiative sometime before the end of this summer, and I'll be reaching out to you to see if you can get more young people to be involved. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a good rest of your day, and please visit the Jeff, and be sure to tune in on Thursday when we have a special session involving remarks by His Royal Highness Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Lawrence. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Lawrence. Great job. Thank you. Good.
It was really great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you again to all of our roundtable participants for such an insightful conversation. We are so excited to have had you participate in our first ever intergenerational roundtable on energy and climate change, and we are sure this won't be the last. This ends our programming for day 6 of the Jeff. Make sure you come back tomorrow for our panel sessions focused on the customer and new business models.